Good evening, everybody. Annette Reynolds here. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Waltham, and welcome to our Know Your City series. I'm delighted to have Bill Doyle with me this evening. Many of you know him, and as I did, and I said, as I usually do, please send me some information, a bio. And I was really quite impressed. Normally I'll say, here's Bill, you know, he does this. I want to read this to you because it's quite impressive. Bill is a visionary, an inventor, developer, and the founding president of Doyle Engineering, Inc. Mr. Doyle has more than 25 years experience in the field of planning, construction, and civil engineering, with emphasis on site utility design, on-site wastewater treatment, construction administration, and innovative and alternative stormwater management. Bill has provided planning, permitting, engineering design, and consulting services for both large and small scale construction, renovations, additions, and infrastructure related improvements throughout the United States. He specializes in providing sustainable site design and consulting, stormwater master planning, utility design, and environmental permitting for large commercial, institutional, and residential projects. He has a long history of practical construction experience. A graduate of the University of Maine, Bill is a registered professional engineer in Massachusetts and Maine, is a LEED accredited professional, and holds various engineering-related certifications. Bill is passionate about community involvement and has been a commissioner of the Waltham Conservation Commission for over 15 years and chairman for the past 3. What a resume, Bill. I'm delighted you're here with us tonight. So
well, thank you.
I'm actually going to turn it over to you, and I will ask our audience, if you have questions, please type them either into the Q&A or into the chat, and I will be monitoring them and presenting them to Bill as they are appropriate. Bill, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Annette. So just for some semantics here, I can see just myself and you, Annette, but there's other people on. Typically,
yes. Oh, yes.
There's a bunch of others on. Okay, so I usually like to see a face when I'm speaking to people, but we'll see how I do here. So thank you for the introduction. That is the bulk of my history and who I am and what I've been doing for the past 25 or so years. And as you guys may know and understand, obviously been involved with the Conservation Commission, which is why Annette the League of Women Voters has invited me here tonight to speak a little bit, briefly, hopefully, and succinctly and an understanding way about what we do in the Conservation Commission. My history in the Conservation Commission is actually kind of unique. Maybe not unique, I don't know. I started, Gloria Champion actually witnessed me presenting to the commission some years back when I was involved with doing the elementary schools and the middle schools. I was the civil engineer on those projects, the 8 elementary and middle schools that were constructed by 16, 17 years ago. And I had to present a couple of those projects to the then Conservation Commission. And since then soon after I presented those projects and got them approved through the commission, I was actually ended up being on the commission. It's kind of my local history and how I got involved in the local politics of the commission. But enough about me, and let me dive into a little bit with the commission. And I see I have the share screen button, so I can just click on that and it's all me. Okay, so I pulled together a couple of slides. They're a little, I don't want to say, well, typically my slides are a lot more pictures and a lot less words. Tonight, I think I have a lot more words than pictures. Actually, I have very little pictures and mostly words. So hopefully they won't be too boring for you folks. But again, this is a Know Your City series by the League of Women Voters. Bill Doyle, I'm presenting on the Waltham Conservation Commission. See if I can switch slides here. I think I have to scroll. So I'm going to start a bit with the regulatory and where we come from, why the Conservation Commission essentially exists, and how it came to be. There are conservation commissions in every community in the state of Massachusetts. Some communities are smaller communities and they share conservation commissions. They have conservation boards, but all have similar authority. We get our roots from Mr. Richard Nixon back in 1970 when he actually created the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. That's at the federal level. And there's a lot of words here, and I knew this was going to get recorded. So I wanted to give the words. This is just Wikipedia giving this information. I just found that was the most succinct and easy to look up and digestible format. But I just highlighted a couple of the points here. And I am going up to the federal level because that's where the authority of our local conservation commission comes from. So back in 1970, Richard Nixon proposed and created the Environmental Protection Agency, which is a federal agency that says this is how we are going to take care of essentially our water and our environment. Soon after the EPA was created, the EPA actually within it created the Clean Waters Act. And that came out in 1972. I don't know why I got into the work that I do, but since I was a very young boy, I was always into, ponds, rivers, streams, water. And it was appropriate, and maybe this was the reason, but in 1972, I was also born, and as was the Clean Waters Act. And highlighted there, you'll see that the main objectives of the Clean Waters Act, without reading it all, but I'll read the highlighted areas: restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. It seems pretty basic when we look at it now, we think of that now, but ahead of 1970, before Richard Nixon's vision of an EPA, and before 1972, where actually regulations were put into place, we weren't really doing that great a job taking care of our waters, taking care of our streams, our rivers. And you can even go back and even look here in Waltham, the streams and rivers were looked at as the dumping grounds. That's where the sewage went before it was flushed out to sea. And we're still trying to fix the ills of our forefathers in that regard. Trying to fix and clean the Charles River and all the little individual streams and tributaries that deliver water to the Charles and ultimately the Boston Harbor. As you go down the EPA definition there, you'll see I highlighted another section: in coordination, the Environmental Protection Agency, in coordination with state governments. That's when we start to hear about, or starts to give this federal document, this federal act, starts to say to the states, look, we've got it. You guys are going to be on the front lines of this. You guys have to pick up the torch here and start doing stuff in your individual cities and states. And that's a smart move. The federal agency says, okay, let's take care of the water. How do we do it? Well, Alaska is going to do it a lot different than Southern California is going to do it, a lot different than Florida is going to do it, and a lot different than Massachusetts is going to do it. So let's give that authority to the states. There's another part of that, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So then the next part that I've highlighted talks about filling or dredging. We're talking about water, stuff that we're going to do underneath the water. Filling or dredging are administered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's interesting to see, when we look at the Wetlands Protection Act, which we'll get into in a second, it talks about buffers to these areas. It talks about the land it talks about the property on the land side of the water. It doesn't give authority underwater. It doesn't give authority to put piers in. It doesn't give authority to dredge out the mouth of the Mississippi so you can get, barges and stuff up there. It doesn't get into, Boston Harbor needs to be dredged for whatever reason. That authority, although people look at our commission and say, hey, they're doing this in the water, they're doing this in the river, can't you guys do something? We work with the Army Corps, we interact with the Army Corps, but our jurisdiction kind of ends at the water's edge, and the Army Corps of Engineers takes control in there. So where we see it mostly in Waltham is when someone wants to put a dock or something in the Charles River, or even in Hardy Pond. It ends up being an Army Corps of Engineer thing, and it's actually out of our jurisdiction, even though it's water and it looks like environment and looks like a conservation thing. So I just highlight those. That's kind of the crux of where, between the EPA being created in 1970 and the Clean Waters Act. The Clean Waters Act is really what gives us our authority, and where it gives us our authority is that second thing that I spoke of. And I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, but in coordination with state governments. That's what gives the conservation commissions and is what gives the Massachusetts the authority through the EPA, through the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, to give the Waltham Conservation Commission its jurisdiction to do what we're going to do to protect the wetlands and waterways in Waltham. So this is right out of Annette, you're raising your hand?
Yeah. The question is, there no state legislation that covers the CW?
Yeah, so we'll get into that. And I think it's, I forget how I ordered these slides, but that's, it's right here. It's coming out.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to do here is just kind of trickle down, like where, we in Waltham didn't just pick up, a pen and say, okay, this is how we're going to protect the wetlands. This comes down from the state. It comes down, and from the state, it comes down from the federal government. So in actuality, as we think about it, when we have problems with it, we can actually appeal to the state level. We can appeal to the federal level and say, hey, these regulations should be changed, or a ruling on these regulations is unjust or something. But let me just keep going with my words here, and then we can open up with a larger conversation. You guys can ask questions whenever. So this is basically right off of our website, and it basically tells a little bit about who we are. The Waltham Conservation is we have an administrator, and then there's 7 local residents that are appointed to the board, and this is how Waltham decided to put together the Conservation Commission based on the framework of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act. So we're an administrator, 7 local residents, and our job is to administer the Wetlands Protection Act. And you can see the general law there for you guys who want to, look it up. And I think this will be made available. You can highlight in Google and all this stuff. But it basically, I don't want to say it's a mirror of the Federal Clean Waters Act. It's kind of an add-on to the Federal Clean Waters Act. And what it does is it doesn't just take the Clean Waters Act and say, do this. It takes the Clean Waters Act and then implements different things and how we want to do it here in Massachusetts. And what we do in Massachusetts for this, and this is different in every state, and I've worked, as Annette had mentioned at the beginning, I've worked all across the country, and even in some of the, the Virgin Islands. And it's interesting to go to different municipalities and see how the different municipalities in different states have interpreted the Clean Water Act for how they want to work in their state. California is a lot different. California and actually southwestern United States, you get into Utah, you get into New Mexico and those areas, they have different water rights out there. It's very interesting how the water is managed out there. You have certain amounts of water that you're allowed to, because of farming or whatever, take from XYZ stream and use it on your farmland. And there's the way they deal with water rights out there is a lot different than here. So their interpretation of the Clean Water Act ends up being a lot different. But here in Massachusetts, the way we interpret the Clean Water Act is through the Wetlands Protection Act, which is the local Massachusetts regulation. And essentially, without getting into the hundreds of pages that it is it gives the Wetlands Protection Act here in Massachusetts gives local conservation commissions made up of however the town or city wants to create that commission. In our case, again, an administrator and 7 residents. The Wetlands Protection Act gives us the authority to I don't want to say manage, but oversee the design and development of projects that are within 100 feet of a wetland or a stream, an intermittent stream, or 200 feet from a perennial stream or a river. It does get into discussion about flood zones, and that is a bit of a jurisdictional area. We also will talk a little bit about isolated land subject to flooding, vernal pools, but essentially the act is, the biggest thing that we deal with here in Waltham is areas 100 feet from wetlands or 200 feet from rivers and streams. So basically this is, this slide right here is right from our website, but I've highlighted those kind of big things that make up who we are and what we're actually, our jurisdiction is. Scrolling to the next one. A lot of people will look at our commission and say, you're the Conservation Commission, you should be involved with, or your jurisdiction should include everything that has to do with the environment. If a tree on the commons needs trimming or needs to come down, isn't that an environmental thing that the Conservation Commission should address? We are created by that Wetlands Protection Act in Massachusetts. And what we essentially do, and I just put wetland filings, we administer the Wetlands Protection Act as it relates to wetland filings in those two jurisdictional areas that we talked about, the 100-foot buffer or the 200-foot riverfront area. And essentially we do that through, and I won't get into a lot of detail of what all these are, they're kind of ranking from most common to least common, a notice of intent. So if you're within 100 feet of a wetland or 200 feet of a perennial stream and you want to do work, and certain things are exempt, but most things you need to file a notice of intent, which basically is, this is who I am, this is the project we want to do, and we believe that we're doing it within the performance standards of the Wetlands Protection Act. So a notice of intent is just that. It's notifying us, the commission, but more importantly, the residents, not only the residents abutting the property, but anyone that's going to get notified through, we have to post these every filing in the newspaper, and we send out certified notifications to abutters and other property owners. So it's basically, a notice of intent is basically notifying everybody that has, that may or may not have a stake in this, this filing, that what is exactly going on, and more importantly, how it meets the performance standards outlined in the Wetlands Protection Act. Another thing that we commonly see is a request for determination of applicability, which basically says, well, my project is so small, does it apply? I'm right on the edge, we're not really doing that much. Does the Wetlands Protection Act apply? So for those people who watch us on TV on Thursday nights or Sunday, whenever it airs, you'll hear these things. And when if you're so inclined to watch budget hearings, you'll hear the city council asking us, how many RDAs did you have this year? How many notice of intents did you have this year? And these are kind of the things we say, this is how busy we are by measuring how many of these things we've had. So request for determination of applicability is the Wetlands Protection Act applicable to my project? Abbreviated notice of resource area delineation is, are these actually wetlands? So there's a filing for that. We deal a lot with FEMA areas, flood zones. Oftentimes flood zones and wetlands and rivers and streams kind of all overlap. Flood zones aren't necessarily a resource area per the act, but they are notifiable things. So when work is being done in a flood zone, not only us as the commission, but also the engineering department, I think in Waltham is part responsible for addressing and dealing with that. So you'll see us dealing with FEMA stuff insofar as it's flood zones. Isolated land subjects to flooding is another area that's in the act that basically could be a small puddle or maybe a large puddle in the woods or any place that actually triggers certain things, has certain qualities to it that make it environmentally valuable. So you'll see some of that. We don't have that much of that in Waltham, but they do exist. And I'm trying to go through these quickly just to kind of throw some words out there as to kind of the breadth of things that we deal with. And I'm trying not to get into too much detail to bore everybody. But then we also have certified vernal pools, which essentially is similar to an isolated land subject to flooding, but a certified vernal pool has a certain area of land that contributes to it. And they're actually pretty neat, pretty interesting things. They have a certain wildlife that lives in them, and they actually need to be wet for a certain part of the year and then dry out so that this certain type of critters and, salamanders, some certain plant lives thrive in that environment. And when we find vernal pools, not all of them are certified, so we go around and we try and certify them. There are 2 certified vernal pools that I know of. There may be more. I could be misspeaking on that, but I know there's 2. There's one over on the Payne Estate. Payne Estate? Yes, Payne Estate. And there's one over on Prospect Hill, the backside of Prospect Hill. And those are certified, and you can look them up in the state register, and they're certified as being vernal pools. And they have certain protections around them, and they're things that we look out for. But whereas the 2 that we have certified vernal pools in Waltham, one on Prospect Hill Park and one on the Payne Estate, they kind of already are in protected areas. So we're pretty lucky in that regard. A lot of other, as you can imagine, we have the Cambridge Reservoir in the city of Waltham that serves the city of Cambridge, and this is where they get their water. So there's a certain level of protection that goes on around the reservoirs that we see, one right off of 120, actually both right off 128. It's kind of the upper basin, and then there's the lower basin. And the interesting thing about those is we work closely, very closely, I would say, with the Cambridge Water Department and their watershed protection group to make sure that not only is the Wetland Protection Act being adequately implemented and worked on around their reservoirs, but they also have drinking water supply regulations, which again comes down from a different channel of the Clean Waters Act, but it does come down from the Clean Waters Act. But in Massachusetts, again, that's another side of the DEP here in Massachusetts that kind of implements drinking water standards. So the waters and the wetlands and the tributaries around the Cambridge reservoirs, which you start to think about that as kind of a massive, grab of area and tributaries. Not only does it have protection, if you will, under the Wetlands Protection Act and what we do as a conservation commission, but it also has protections under the Clean Water Act and the drinking water regulations of Massachusetts. They're actually more stringent than, in some cases, more stringent than what we have to deal with on the Conservation Commission. So we're constantly dealing with the Cambridge Reservoir on that. I think I skipped over the Charles River Watershed Association. Charles River Watershed Association, obviously we have the Charles River going through our community. All of our water from the city of Waltham, say all of our water, but most of our water from the city of Waltham, no, it all does, drains to the Charles River. We have 3 major tributaries, 4 major tributaries. We have the Beaver Brook over by, we have Beaver Brook, we have Chester Brook, we have the West Chester Brook, and what's the other one I'm forgetting? It's over by Beaver Brook. But anyway, we've got the 3 or 4 major streams that eventually get down to the Charles River. And the Charles River, as I mentioned earlier, we know it's been contaminated over the years. It's been the receiving waters for sewer and industrial waste for hundreds of years. And there's been massive efforts since the Clean Water Act was implemented, since the Environmental Protection Agency at the federal level was established. there's been a major effort to clean up the Charles River, and we are seeing major improvements. And those major improvements start at Hardy Pond. They start at the headwaters to the Beaver Brook. They start in the communities and the parking lots of our shopping plazas, in that we're cleaning the water, trying to clean the water, trying to keep it cleaner before it gets into the Charles River. And we're doing this through regulation and through, just public outreach and people wanting to do the right thing and have clean neighborhoods. So we're constantly dealing with the Charles River Watershed Association and the standards that they implement or impose, I would say, maybe it's a strong word, but the concerns that the Charles River Watershed Association have with what's getting into the river. So we're constantly dealing with them and working with them to do the right things there. Part of actually that is working with the City of Waltham Engineering Department and what we call the MS4 permits, which basically is regulations that say, this is how we're going to deal with our stormwater as it goes into sewers and drains. And MS4, as you can read there, a municipal separate storm sewer system. The separate is interesting because we may not think of it too much today, but back in the day, and there's still places in Waltham and a lot of places in Boston, I've done a lot of work, where the sewer and the stormwater goes into the same pipe. And when that happens, the sewers overflow when we have big storms and, we have wastewater, sanitary wastewater from our homes pouring out onto streets. And it does happen here in Waltham still to this day. So the MS4 program, that is pushed down again by the Clean Waters Act at the federal level to work on and try and fix and clean and stop those overflows from happening. And again, that's another, we work with the Waltham Engineering Department and their mandates, mainly through the MS4 permit process, to make sure that the water that's coming from our jurisdictional areas is as clean as it can be and as separate as it can be. Another fun one that comes across us oftentimes is vista pruning. This is an interesting allowance in the regulation because oftentimes we'll get in front of us people say, "Well, I just want to do, I just want to clean up the woods, the wetlands, there's branches that are going to fall, they're going to kill somebody." But the Wetlands Protection Act, in all of their wisdom, was they put in there the idea of vista pruning, which allows people to actually go in. You have to come notify us, let us know what you got going on. But the Wetlands Protection Act allows for going in and doing a certain level. You can't just go clear cut, trees and bushes and shrubs that are within the wetlands. It seems kind of odd that the commission would say, yeah, sure, that's fine, you can go do that, when people are screaming that, there's birds that live in those trees. But the act does allow for that. And then, the final thing, and I put this last, and there's probably a lot more, but these are kind of the big ones that we hear a lot. And I put this one last because when I first got on the commission, a lot of people were saying, it's like, oh my God, that's a real powerful position. You wield a lot of power in the city. You can stop projects. You can control, how things look and feel and play out. And that has kind of like a power monger or fear sound to it. And the violation notice kind of follows suit with that. It's like, oh, don't do this or we're going to issue a violation. We do issue violation notices, but you have to violate the Wetlands Protection Act for us to get there. And a lot of times people will come to us and say, well, you have to stop this project because it violates, it's a violation of the environment. And that may be the case. And there may be a lot of times where we as a commission don't feel that it's the right thing to do. But sometimes the act allows for it. And there's not a lot we can do about it except make sure that whatever the offensive activity is, however it is offensive to others, we can make sure it's done in accordance with the performance standards of the act. But there are certain things that are allowed that we may not think they are. But what we do end up doing in some cases is issuing violation notices. Oftentimes it's a mechanism to make sure that they finish something, an applicant finishes something, or that something is put back in the right places where it's supposed to be in accordance with the act. We don't like to do it. We like to think of ourselves as a very friendly commission. I think we are. We're simply implementing the rules that are given to us. Interesting thing about the rules is we don't have any local regulations for administering, for the wetlands. All of our rules come from the state level. So we can have our opinions as individual commissioners, and we certainly listen to the opinions of the audience and the residents as we have hearings. But our major task is being well versed in what the Wetlands Protection Act allows and doesn't allow, and making sure that we can implement them in a timely manner, and not have appeals either from the property owner that's doing the project or from a local resident. So that's kind of a lot, and it's just, it's a bunch of different items that we do there with their acronyms after them. But when we talk and when we're on the commission, and if you're watching us on Sunday afternoon or when we're on TV, you'll hear these things flying around. And that's kind of just a brief overview of what they are. I'll skip on to the next slide and just kind of show how it shows up in the city of Waltham. Now, this is just a snippet of a map. I tried to find a place on this is Waltham Maps Online. Anyone with a computer or a smartphone can get to this map, and you can get to this layer that it's actually a compilation of layers. And I forget what it's actually titled, but I think you can click on there's a bunch of different pull downs you can do, and you can go to this one. I think it just says wetlands or wetland areas maybe. And then this map will show up. I zoomed into this particular area because it shows a couple of different things. This is, if anyone's familiar with it, Jack's Way. Can you guys, Annette, can people see my pointer?
Yes.
Yes.
I can. I assume they can as well.
Okay. I think there's a way to get a bigger pointer or something, but we'll keep with that. So Jack's Way, we have Kennedy Middle School. We have the high school, to the right of the page. And we have Lexington Street, right, kind of bisecting the page north to south here. The reason I got this picture is because it's interesting. It shows some residential areas here on Chesterbrook Road, and it shows, what could be a commercial building, but it's actually, the middle school, Kennedy Middle School. Then we have Lexington Street, which is a fairly well-traveled road. And then, we have stigmatines, or the future location of the high school, and you can see there's a lot of green area out there. But it's interesting in that this map shows pretty much everything we deal with. And I'll start to the right of the page where it says river. What we see there, and I call it river, but that ends up being, as we found out through the school project, that ends up being a perennial stream, or an intermittent stream rather. So it's not a perennial. So it doesn't actually have the wetlands jurisdictional area. But we do have, on this particular map, and we should probably edit it and fix it, we do show a 200-foot buffer zone to that. We know now that it's not a perennial stream; it's an intermittent stream to a point, and then it goes into a pipe. And what you see there is the blue line just ends, and when that goes into a pipe, it actually is no longer jurisdictional. But that's what a stream would look like on the map, and that's what its 200-foot riverfront area essentially would look like. Moving over to the kind of the center of the page, I have the word flood. And if you see that hatched area, that kind of brown tan hatched area, that ends up being flood zone. Now this is a flood zone that's identified by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's based on elevation data. It's based on the physics of how high is the water likely to travel, up into properties. This is an interesting area because it is somewhat jurisdictional, not as much as wetlands and rivers are. You can do work in the flood zone. There's certain performance standards that you have to deal with. But what you have here are flood zones, and you can see people's houses are in those flood zones. we're constantly being asked if people can put up walls and levees and dikes and things to protect their property. We're constantly seeing people filling in their backyards so that their backyards are high and out of the flood zone. This is all well and good and all, but it's illegal. It may protect your house, but what you end up doing, what ends up happening in these things, which is why, you know, we come in and we work with the engineering department to make sure that these are minimized or not happen at all, is when you take flood volume out of some place. Like if we were to, up at the Kennedy School here where my cursor is, where it says flood, if we were to fill in all that flood zone and not let the water flood there, it's gonna flood someplace else. So when we fill those things, we're just pushing the problem, the flood problem, downstream someplace. And if we do it, if people do it without regard to the way you're supposed to do it, we literally can be just causing, you're just basically pushing the problem down to somebody else's property. So we end up being pretty big sticklers on flood zone violations because they do cause a physical threat to people's property downstream. So flood zone, again, this is how it shows up on the city maps. This is how we end up dealing with it. Down to the bottom right of the screen where my cursor is circling now, this is kind of your standard wetland. There's a stream that goes into that. It's got its 200-foot buffer. And then the wetland ends up having its 100-foot buffer. I didn't label 100-foot buffer, but your wetland ends up having your 100-foot buffer. So when you look at these maps, and obviously there's a key on the map and you can look at that, what you're seeing here is rivers, flood zones, and wetlands, and their jurisdictional boundaries. If you've got a property that falls within those green lines that you see that kind of, you know, outline these resource areas, you're going to need, if you're going to do work on those properties, you're going to need to notify us and notify the commission. And this is per state law, not per the city of Waltham. This is state law. You're going to need to notify us that you're proposing work there. Cities and town, municipalities, utility owners get some relief when they're working on projects that lie within rights of ways, within roads. If you had to pull a notice of intent and go through the whole regulatory process every time you wanted to clean a catch basin or fix a pipe in a street, it would be too onerous of a task to do. So certain relief is given. Annette, I see you have a question.
Yes, what's an example of a flood zone violation for residential properties?
So if you historically had your backyard as flooding, and you have your swing set back there or something, and you say, you know what, I don't want this to flood anymore. I'm gonna bring in a couple of big dump truck loads of fill material, and I'm gonna level off my backyard so that it no longer slopes down to the stream. I'm gonna level that off and now have a nice level backyard that's up high. What you've essentially done there, if you're in a flood zone, is you would have filled the flood zone, and that fill, you can't do that without making up for it someplace else, if you will. They call it compensatory storage. So if you fill in a flood zone, 100 cubic feet of fill to level off your backyard, you have to take out 100 cubic feet of soil someplace else in an affected area, so that the net change is zero. So that's oftentimes what we see. It's somebody putting something in a flood zone that takes up volume. A good example of it is I forget what the name of it is, the U-Store storage place over on Lyman Street across from Creonte Tire. It's kind of new. And the apartment buildings right next door to that that have been there for a while. If you notice the development there, especially the storage units, the whole property, with the exception of a couple of points that come down to the ground, all the storage is raised up above the ground. It's up on piles. And if you go behind that building, it's pretty much clear behind there. The flood waters are allowed to actually flow in underneath that building. The only way they were able to build that building is if they built it up on stilts as it is. The interesting thing about that, and I was going to use that area in this graphic over by Lyman Street, by Creonte Tire and the trestle, the old railroad trestle there. If you're standing underneath that railroad trestle and you're 6 feet, 5.5 feet tall, a 100-year flood would be over your head underneath that trestle. That's what a 100-year flood does underneath there. So we've had flooding down there. I've never seen it myself personally up that high. But the FEMA maps and the last model they did in that area, which was actually quite some time ago, the last model they did shows that flood zone, I think, is about 5.5 feet or so on the side of that granite bridge. So it can be pretty pretty amazing how much water that would take to do that. So anytime you fill in a flood zone is when it ends up being an issue that needs to be dealt with. You can do it. A lot of the stuff that people say you believe you can't do, you can do. You just have to meet the performance standards. And for flood zone, it's if you fill in 100 cubic feet, you have to clean out 100 cubic feet in the flood zone someplace so that you have a net change of 0. A lot of what I'm talking about, these green lines and what, the idea that you have to notify to do work in these areas, it's not a blank, no, you can't do it. You just have to go through a different process and meet the certain performance standards. But you can literally build right up against wetlands. The act allows for that. You just have to meet the standards. It's kind of a misconception because people oftentimes think, oh, you didn't do your job. You didn't protect the wetlands. You didn't keep them, 100 feet or 200 feet away. The 100 feet or 200 feet isn't to say you can't do it. It's to say you have to do a notice of intent. You have to notify us as to what you're doing, and we have to deem that it's proposed to be done under the performance standards of the act. So it's not a no, you can't do it. It's a how do we do it right? And that's really what the commission is. And that's, again, why I put violations as kind of the last thing. The violation is no, you can't do that. But usually it means you can do it. You just have to do it right. And we're not a commission of saying, and we don't have the authority to say you can't do something, but we kind of do. But more often what we're trying to do is make sure that you do it to the standards of the act. And anyone that hires, a competent designer, engineer, landscape architect that knows the regulations will present forward 99.9% of the time a project that can be done with minor tweaks and minor adjustments. So I wanted to show this map because this is available. Go on Waltham Maps online. You can scroll through and play around there a little bit and find the wetland areas tab, and you'll pull up this map. And when you zoom in to your house, you'll be able to see, are you in any of these jurisdictional areas? We've recently updated this map to, include new GIS information. But things are constantly changing and constantly being revised and updated, and more information is being understood on different areas. So this map, is subject to change. I don't think I have too many more slides. And a lot of this we may have gone through, but I just wanted to kind of, the duties of the commission. What do we do, day to day? And I think you'll find, whether it's myself, we have a very diverse board, I think, and we have had a diverse board since I've been on the commission, some like 15 years or so ago. I'm a civil engineer. You heard my resume. The chair now, the acting chair now, the current chair now, Phil Moser. He's a civil engineer, but I think his concentration is more structural. We have a certified public accountant. We have a construction manager. Brad is a landscape contractor, vastly more knowledgeable than me about all the different species of trees. And we have a new commissioner, Matt, who just came on, who's a commercial and residential inspector, which brings a very well-rounded knowledge of all aspects of development and construction. Annette, you have a question?
Mary Sue wanted to know, how long do the local residents serve on the board?
Interesting. We have, I was hired for a 3-year term.
sorry.
15 years ago. But there is some provision or something in there that allows it to can keep going if the space is there and you don't want to quit and there's no reason to change you. So I think I fall into that category. I think the second longest person, Jerry's been there for maybe 12 or 10 or 13 years, somewhere around there. I've started to take a little bit of a back seat to things to let some other people, kind of, learn the ropes and stuff. But I enjoy it. I say this, and if anyone in the commission's listening, they've heard it a million times. I've been on it for 15 years and I've never missed a meeting. I like to think that's impressive, but who knows? That's just me.
We'll get you a perfect attendance certificate.
Yeah, we'll have to. I don't know if there's any cash bonus in that or not, but
well, do you get paid? Is there compensation to the members?
So yes, there is a stipend that covers kind of travel and, because what you'll see here in the list of things that we do attend hearings, which is, a lot of boards and commissions do that. We do, well, let me go through the list. And yes, we do get a stipend and it's meant to take care of our work out in the woods. But what we do, and I went through the commission and the makeup of the commission, because essentially what we are a bunch of people that promote and care, protecting and management of Waltham's natural resources. We do like being out in the woods, and we do like making sure that, the rivers and streams are taken care of. For whatever psychotic reason we all like to do that, we do. And I was appointed by this current mayor, as has been everybody that's on the commission now. And I think she's done a great job at appointing people that are passionate about what we do. And if I were to put it into one sentence, that top bullet point would be it. You promote the care, protection, and management of Waltham's natural resources. We review from residential, the person that wants to put a deck on the back of their house, to municipal, when the engineering department or the CPW needs to, do some type of work around the wetlands, or commercial projects. And we know Waltham is heavily with commercial properties up on Bear Hill, up along 128, and all of that. Again, that large swath of that area drains to the Cambridge water supply. So we're constantly working with the commercial property owners up there, in conjunction with the Cambridge Water Department and the Mass DEP to implement the regulations. Obviously, we have our public hearings. You guys can watch us. Again, we're on every Thursday and every other Thursday night, and I don't know when they broadcast us. I think it's Sundays. So we're doing our hearings. They're legal hearings. Subject to open meeting law and everything we have to work on there. Robert's rules, make sure they run smoothly and everything. So we're doing the hearings. They end up being legally binding when when we have violations and when there are questions as to whether things were done right, or when there are appeals. So we've got to make sure we're doing the public hearings well, or we're subject to appeals. Schedule and attend site visits. This is actually we hear a lot and see a lot at the meetings, and a lot of that's on TV, and we can have a solid understanding of what's going on there. But a lot of what's going on, a lot of what happens, and we talk about it at hearings, and we have our reports as to what happens on site. But a lot of what we do is end up out in the woods, out in a parking lot, out at a retention basin someplace, looking at exactly how these things are being put together, and do they meet or will they meet the standards outlined in the Wetlands Protection Act. So a lot of what we do have that meeting every other week, a couple hours, sometimes 3 hours a night, every other Thursday. But a lot of what we're doing, whether, the 5, 6, or 7 of us on the commission, we're constantly out throughout the week, oftentimes before work, or even after, not so much nowadays because it's dark at night, but, in the summertime, 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, we're out looking at sites with applicants, with engineers, making sure they're being put together, whether it's being designed right, before the permit's issued, or it's being constructed right after the permit's issued and the contractors are doing their job, or at the end of the project when they're closing it out and saying, has the project been put together the right way? Those are the 3 times we're usually out on site, the 3 kind of milestones to be on site, but we're constantly on site on all the various projects that are done in town. So when you look at the list of projects we have, and you look at those, 3 kind of times when we're out visiting the sites, it can add up. So it's very helpful to have, a 7-person commission to make sure that we can get to these projects and make sure that, not only is the act being adhered to, but the environment, our city's environment is being protected. We're not police force, but we do come with some authority in that we can issue a violation. We can say, look, you've got to stop what you're doing or there's going to be trouble. Oftentimes, we don't stop people from what they're doing. We just steer them back to the right direction. What we've been very good about not doing is telling somebody to stop and just dropping everything where they stand and then leaving this open wound that can be more of a detriment to the environment than if we just let them close it up and we'll figure out how to fix it after. Or we can work with them and have them fix it as they're going, which is what we like to do. So we need to be out there constantly on projects, whether it's design phase, the construction phase, the post-construction phase, to not act as the police, but to police and make sure that things are going together right. I'll breeze through these next couple, quickly because I kind of hit on most of it. Ultimately, when we're deliberating on a project that comes before us, our ultimate goal is to create a condition of approval. We want to approve the project and we want to condition it in such a way that it gets done the way it's supposed to get done. That's kind of what the act is mandating that we do. Other stuff we do, we have some different conservation initiatives, and we'll go through a couple of those in a second. We do issue violation notices. We went over that. One of the responsibilities of the Conservation Commission is to provide a person to the Community Preservation Commission. So when the CPC is allocating money or when applications come into the CPC, there's a voice for the Conservation Commission in that room. And that's mandated by the CPC regulations in the town, in the city of Waltham, that someone from the commission be there. I think the Historic Commission as well, and Parks and Rec, and so that's another thing that we do. And we usually just basically liaise to back and forth from the CPC to the Conservation Commission. The Conservation Commission does have a trust fund that was created some years ago through donations. We manage that. It's a small amount of money. We use the interest to do different things. Ultimately, any money we spend needs to go through City Council anyway. But we manage that. We don't necessarily, we come up with ideas for how to spend it. We use it here and there. But it also has to go through the City Council before any of that gets spent. And don't ask me what the numbers are on that. I forget what how much is in there. It's not a whole heck of a lot. We obviously participate in the Charles River cleanup, and there's a lot of cross-contamination, maybe the wrong word. There's a lot of cross-breeding with the Waltham Land Trust. They're obviously, their mission and our missions are very similar, and we play in the same woods oftentimes. So that's kind of like a snippet of the things that we're kind of actively involved in. And here are some of the initiatives. And I think this is the last slide for those people who are bored at looking at text and listening to me talk. In an interesting move some years back, the Storer Payne estate, when it was gifted to the city of Waltham, jurisdiction to it was given to the Historic Commission in part, and in part to the Conservation Commission. So we have some level of oversight there. But a couple of projects we're working on out there is during a survey, seeing what the property is, seeing different encroachments, all in kind of the beginning stages of developing kind of a management plan for the property. Annette, did you have a question or?
No, I have a few questions, but they can wait.
Okay, and good, because I'm almost done here. This for people who are bored of text and me talking, we'll get through these quickly. So on the Payne Estate, wisteria, very interesting plant, beautiful plant, looks great. Was a beautiful ornamental plant back in the day, but it's massively invasive, and it's been basically creeping and crawling up trees, big pine trees, big oak trees, and everything throughout the Payne Estate, particularly on the west side, like right behind Clark's Pond area. Some massive wisteria trees, shrubs, vines, whatever you want to call them, up in that area. And we've been working diligently. Brad has been working diligently on our commission to work at getting those removed so that it doesn't strangle out the whole Payne Estate over there. The citywide natural resources inventory, you can read a little bit more on that. Store Payne Estate Conservation Stewardship Plan. Again, we're trying to develop I don't want to call it a master plan, but a management plan for the forest out there. There's a lot going on out there as far as people wanting to use it, and then the idea of preserving it. So how does that get done? Can we do it in a better way? Hardy Pond's shore restoration study. We're doing a lot of collecting of data to, what we can afford through different grants and different approvals to figure out how to restore the Hardy Pond. Hardy Pond is a very interesting water body, and there's other people that are much more well versed in the legalities of it. But it is what they call a great pond. It's owned by the Division of Conservation Recreation. It's owned by the state, not necessarily Waltham. The shoreline of, obviously from the water line back is a question as, where the property line of it ends, where the high water is. So it's an important thing. It's a great pond. Great pond has a certain definition to it that, again, other people are well more versed than I, and certain protections with it. And where that shoreline is, ends up being important. But also, if you can imagine, it's an inland pond that, is served by all of the residents that are around it. And by served, I mean, that's where it gets its water. So all of the residents around it are connected. So it's interesting to understand. It will be interesting to understand and how we're going to, work on that pond being a state piece of property, being a gray pond, and being in an urban environment. And Mount Feet Cemetery Reservoir, Riverfront ecosystem study, again, looking at the Mount Feet is a beautiful piece of property. The shoreline there is beautiful. It's also on the Charles River, which we talked briefly about, and it's in a cemetery, a well manicured area. So how do the shoreline, how does that buffer, if you will, between the river and the well used cemetery, how is it protected? How does it work? So these are just kind of other initiatives that we're kind of working on at various levels. And I'll leave it at that. And, any questions? I've been talking for a lot. I always like these things to be more open, and I'll just take questions and let Annette run the show, and I'll see what I can answer.
Well, I have a few questions here.
Okay.
The first two are kind of back to back. The nature of Waltham's population has changed over the last 25 years. Do you think that the members of the commission reflect the diversity of the current population? And besides a passion for conservation, are there other skill sets that are needed by the members of the commission? For example, you mentioned going out with engineers. Is an engineering degree part of the requirements to serve on the commission?
Okay. Diversity, as far as I don't know what the demographics of the commission are, but of the city are, off the top of my head. But if I were to look at the commission, I mean, we are 6 white men, 45. I don't want to say what the top end is because I don't know and I don't want to offend anybody, but 45 and up. Or maybe Phil's a little younger than that. I don't know. So I would say, as far as the diversity of Waltham versus the diversity of the commission, if you're looking at that, those demographics, then I would say, well, that's what they are. As far as skill set needed to be on the commission, I would say it's 80% passionate about the environment, not even about the environment, just about protecting it and doing, you know, the civic duty that we have on the commission. If the environment isn't your thing, you still would be of valued having a different opinion than maybe some of the people on the commission who are very much environmentalists. Passion for, you know, being involved in helping the city. I think that's a number one. I think environment, knowledge of environment or passion about the environment would fall after that. And then I think, you know, education credentials, I would say it could be anywhere. My resume, my professional job is mainly presenting to commissions all over the state. It's become late. I did talk about, you know, work I have done in California and Mississippi and Florida and all around the country, in Utah. But most of my work right now is in front of different commissions and boards. And when I see those different commissions, conservation commissions around, you'll find people that have no background in environment, lawyers that are, you know, family lawyers, not necessarily even environmental or construction lawyers. And you'll find, you know, just, you know, homemakers that don't have a full-time job at all or education in the field. So I see it all. I saw all kinds of different folks on commissions. So I would say there's no prerequisite. There's no resume that is any different than, is any better than any others, I would say. Long answer. I'm sorry. I hope I.
Another question, how does the sump pump program interact with the Conservation Commission?
Okay, sump pump program is an interesting thing. So this is what I'll try to explain it briefly, not to bore so many people. What you have the sump pump program is groundwater getting into people's basements. And people have naturally reacted to that by, well, how do we get it out of here? Let's pump it into the sewer, because that pipe is right there. It's leaving my basement. I can just pump it right in there and it goes to the sewer. So what you end up doing with that is you now have groundwater, almost an infinite supply of water being pumped into the city sewer system that eventually flows down to the Deer Island wastewater treatment plant out in Boston Harbor. And that's all well and good because your basement's dry. But what happens is we have to pay for every gallon that's pumped into that system. So if you have a pump that's running every night, every day, and it's pumping, you know, hundreds of gallons of water in there, that water goes into, and we have to pay for it, goes into the city and then ultimately the state sewer system, and we have to pay for it. So the sump pump program basically is an attempt. I think it's a valid, you know, it's a valid attempt at eliminating those connections to the city sewer by providing a sump pump system that gets the water from people's basements or from these wet areas in their homes up and out, and not connecting it to the municipal sewer system and not sending it to the wastewater treatment plant in Boston Harbor, and essentially not paying for that gallonage going to the, you know, the state system. We interact with it minimally because what it's essentially doing is it's taking groundwater and it's discharging it on the ground or into a dry well or something outside of the building. We get involved in a limited capacity when that work to install that system is in a jurisdictional area and the ground has to be dug up for whatever reason. If that's in a jurisdictional area, our job is to say, well, if you're going to dig up the ground here, we love the idea, we love the program, but you have to do it the right way. And essentially, it means making sure that you're not going to harm the wetlands or discharge massive amounts of water that are going to cause erosion into the wetlands. So we love the program. Again, it just needs to be, if it's in a jurisdictional area, we're going to mandate that it's implemented in accordance with the Wetlands Protection Act.
Good. One last question. Whoops. there's a second one just popped up, but let me ask you this one. Are there any current issues at the Fernald and the new high school sites that involve the commission? And if so, can you briefly address them?
Yeah, the Fernald's interesting. We are not actively, I shouldn't say that. There may be some open orders out there. So there were a couple of projects that were done. There was some building demolitions that occurred. Some of them were in jurisdictional areas or were in buffers to jurisdictional areas. So we did see a couple of notice of intents, and we talked about those earlier. The applicant being the city come before us, and we issued, orders of condition so that those projects could come forward. Those were mainly building removals, cleaning up and trying to, get rid of stuff that was on property. Another initiative that has occurred out there is the idea of replicating a pond that was up in the north corner of the property. Historically, fill material had been brought in, or the earth had been changed to allow for some development. We have since taken out that development, and there's a proposal out to restore a pond, restore a stream that was once there. We had a big hand in bringing that forward, and looking at it and approving certain aspects of it so that it could move forward. I understand it's in the design and funding stage to move even further forward, and we're looking forward to seeing how that plays out. Those are, and again, I think there was 3 or 4 different building removals that were in jurisdictional area on the Fernald, and then there's that larger kind of proactive initiative of rehabilitating the stream that was once there. That's the Fernald. As far as the high school site, that is an active, the Stigma Teens property off Lexington Street, the new high school site, that is an active open meeting right now. We met last week, and we're getting more information from the applicant. We have hired a peer reviewer to help us review the complexity of that project. And that is an open order that I'm not sure when we'll have a final closeout on it so that they can move forward with more design and everything. But the 2 resource areas out there, well, the 1 resource area out there, ends up being the stream that I kind of identified on one of the earlier slides. There's an intermittent stream out there that does have wetlands associated with it. So there is buffer to those wetlands. So there's, that's an active filing with us. And we're, I don't want to say litigating, that sounds too legal, but we're reviewing that project now, presently.
Okay, another question. The city's open space plan reads like a park and recreation document. Is the Conservation Committee consulted about the health of the wetlands related to regrading of land or new business abutting the buffer zone?
The buffer zone of just anything that's in the open space plan? I understand how you questions there, I guess. I haven't looked at the open space plan in a couple of years. It came out a couple of years ago, didn't it? We have looked at that, and when and I was talking briefly about the Payne Estate management plan. One of the documents that we're looking at and how we can dovetail the 2 together is the open space plan, because it does talk about the Payne Estate, talks about Prospect Hill Park and all these larger open spaces. When it does talk about the wet areas and the streams, and I forget if it had anything about the vernal pools in there. When work will be when that master plan or operational plan, if you will, moves forward and different initiatives are done out of it, and those initiatives occur within, if they have to do a new path or something, and it's in a jurisdictional area, or a new bridge that's going over a stream or something, those are items that will come before us. The open space plan is basically, it's kind of high level. When those things get implemented, if they are in jurisdictional area, the town, the city, the rec department, and they come before us often for the different parks in town, will come before us for those projects. And some of them may be simple and not be applicable, if you will, to the act, and they may, be easier than other ones. Ideally, open space, recreation, pathways through woods, making things accessible that are, easy to do like that. They usually kind of fall below the major requirements. But either way, we'll look at them and review them, and we'll give a determination as to whether they have to, do a full-blown compliance with performance standards, or if it's something that's fairly benign, and if they massage it a certain way, they go with minimal impact.
Okay, one last question. Does the commission have any remit for public education?
Any what?
Mary Sue? Let's see what she's typing here. Remit is what she wrote, R-E-M-I-T.
Oh, okay. So we don't have a formal, I guess you say like
Responsibility is how she.
Responsibility, no. But we're constantly, working with the different folks in town, whether it be the schools. Oftentimes it comes in through Payne Estate and different classes and stuff wanted to use the Payne Estate. We do, Brad, say newer. Everyone's newer to me on the commission. But Brad's one of our newer members. Matt's the newest, but Brad's one of our newer members. He's been instrumental at really pushing forward a lot of training initiatives for invasives, for how to care and manage for trees and in our jurisdictional areas. And I think you're going to see, and I want to give some props to Phil, the chairman now, and Brad for this, a greater push for outreach and basically educating people. I think what we're finding is that we as a group of 7, backed with the Wetlands Protection Act and some of the legal stuff, we can only do so much. But if we can create an awareness and create a sense of ownership, we can have an army of people that are doing the right things, in compliance with the act, or at the very least understanding what they can't do and that they have to notify us. So I think we're going to see under Phil and Brad's initiatives and what they're doing, what they're moving forward with, a greater outreach, which I would consider an education of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bill, I can't thank you enough for sharing all of this information. It's been quite remarkable.
Good. I hope I didn't bore anybody. I kind of ramble on sometimes, but
I'm getting thank you very much in the question and answer box, so it's greatly appreciated. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here this evening. The presentation has been recorded and shortly it will be available online. Oh my goodness, you're getting so many thank yous, Bill. Okay.
Well, thank you all.
So everyone have a good night, stay safe and be well.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
We'll talk to you later.